Okay, welcome to 4.4. We're going to look at how tissues work together in plants. And starting off, I want to talk about photosynthesis. We did in our previous, not our previous lesson, the lesson before that, we talked about the chemical and word reaction for photosynthesis. And you should be able to write it all down. But for the chemical reaction, we have carbon dioxide plus water produces and it requires light energy as well. It produces C6H12O6, which is glucose, as well as O2, which is oxygen, right? So this is the formula for photosynthesis. And so based off of this, it can tell us what plants need in order to do photosynthesis, right? Pretty easily, the three things that the plant requires in order for this reaction to occur is 1, light energy, or sunlight. That's an N, not an H. Secondly, it needs carbon dioxide, right? That's why plants, when they're exposed to the atmosphere, they take in that carbon dioxide, they produce and release oxygen, CO2. And it needs water, which is why if you have a plant, you need to water it, H2O. Great. So we're going to be looking at each different requirement for photosynthesis and learn about how that requirement is fulfilled by the plant. Let's first look at carbon dioxide. How does the plant obtain carbon dioxide? So I've started off drawing this picture here, and I want to go through it with you in a lot more detail. If I were to cut a leaf, I can see within the cross section, it looks a little bit like this. Right? So if I were to cut open a leaf, I could see the top part of this leaf and the bottom part of this leaf. And I just want to go through and label each of these sections with you. So that very, very top part and the very, very bottom part of the leaf is what we call a cuticle. It's just like you have for the nail. It's this waxy layer that is found on the very, very outermost part of a leaf. Then you've got these black things that I've drawn there. They're not actually black. I've just sort of wanted to distinguish there. Those are epidermal cells. Remembering back to our types of tissues, epiderm was part of the dermal tissue type, right? So the outside part of the leaf is an epiderm, or a layer of epidermal cells. And the cuticle, actually, that we just saw that covers the top and the bottom is a waxy substance that's released by the epidermal cells. Then if you look at the bottom, and only at the bottom, there are some holes or openings that are there only at the bottom part of this leaf. And these are called stomata. And the last structure that you see there that we haven't addressed are the two things that are right beside the stomata. Those are guard cells that close and open the stomata. So the whole purpose of the stomata is to allow for carbon dioxide to come into the leaf and go outside of the leaf. So carbon dioxide is a huge part of photosynthesis. It's one of our reactants, right? So the leaf needs a lot of it, and that's why we would open up the stomata to allow for carbon dioxide to enter this leaf. So why is there a requirement for this stomata to open and close as well? Why wouldn't we just leave it open all the time? So sure, it's really, really good to allow for carbon dioxide to enter, and lots of carbon dioxide will enter if the stomata is left open. I'm just going to write that down. Right, so it allows for carbon dioxide to enter easily. but it also allows for a lot of water to be released as well. So there's a risk if the stomata is left open that a lot of water vapor, which is water in its gaseous form, can leave that particular leaf as well. And that's bad because you need water for photosynthesis. So we require it to close every once in a while so that the leaf does not get dried out completely. So closing it conserves water. Another thing about the opening and closing of the stomata is that the stomata usually is opened during the day or when there's lots of sunlight. And that makes sense because sunlight is a huge part of photosynthesis as well. So when there's lots of sunlight and photosynthesis can happen, the stomata allow for lots of carbon dioxide to go in as well. And then if it's nighttime and there's no sunlight at all, even though it's able to have carbon dioxide enter, there's no purpose because photosynthesis is not possible, which means it just closes. And the guard cells that are around the stomata are able to detect the amount of water there is in the leaf, which if there's lots of water, then they're okay to open it up, which means that even if they do lose a bit of water, there's still water within that leaf. But if water levels are really low, then they close up so as to conserve the water that they did have. Okay, the next part about what the plant requires is sunlight. And just like we mentioned earlier, it's the same sort of diagram. I'm not going to label everything again. But when it comes to sunlight, what's inside of the leaf is completely very, very important. So what's lining the very top part of our leaf are a bunch of chloroplasts, and I'm drawing these in, and they're very, very tightly packed. Or they're supposed to be. I'm trying to draw these in. So they're supposed to be super tightly packed at the very, very top of this leaf. And that does make sense because the more chloroplasts there are, the more sunlight can be absorbed and the more photosynthesis can take place. Now, towards the bottom part of the leaf, you will notice that there are chloroplasts still, but they are loosely packed. So there's a lot of space between those chloroplasts. The top part, or the closely packed part of chloroplasts, are what we call the palisade layer. And what this allows to do is capture as much sunlight as possible so as to increase the amount of photosynthesis. So each of those little green blobs are chloroplasts, and at the top where they're all long and they're all packed together, that is the palisade layer. And the bottom, more loosely packed chloroplasts are the spongy mesophyll layer. So what the palisade layer allows to do is capture as much sunlight as possible. And then the spongy mesophyll, the reason why there's space between the spongy mesophyll is because they're close to the stomata, and the stomata allows for carbon dioxide to go in. So the space between those chloroplasts allow for the air to travel pretty easily at the bottom of that leaf. And lastly, we're going to take a look at obtaining water, which is our third component of what the plant needs for photosynthesis. And earlier, when we looked at the stomata, we noticed, or we realized, that the stomata closes so that they can conserve water. However, that might lead us to ask, where did the water come from when the plant anyways? So the answer lies in the root system of the plant. And if you've ever taken a look at roots, or if you've plucked up a plant and you looked at the root, you'll notice that there's a bunch of hair that grows on that root. Now, the hair is really, really important, and it plays a huge part in the water absorption. So all of the water is absorbed from the roots. That's why when you're watering a plant, it makes sense for you to actually water the soil that the plant is in so that it can absorb that water. So those root hairs increase the surface area of the root. And increasing the surface area is really important because that's how the water comes into the plant. The greater the area there is for the water absorption, the more water is able to be absorbed. And that water is absorbed through a process called osmosis. Again, going back to chapter 2. So water is able to go into the plant as well. Now, so just as an overview, so we looked at photosynthesis and each of the 3 requirements that the plant has to meet in order for photosynthesis to happen, which is 1, sunlight. That is the palisade layer and the spongy mesophyll help with photosynthesis. It needs carbon dioxide, which is let in through the stomata, as well as it needs water, which is absorbed through the roots. As for the homework, you are going to do questions 2 and 3 on page 130, and 4 on page 139 as well. Bye.